Stay in.
Welcome to Making Democracy Work, a monthly program brought on topics of community interest, brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Honolulu. Today, we're going to talk about World War II in Hawaii and the effects that it had on Hawaii, as well as the effects that Hawaii had on the country. We have with us today Tom Kaufman, author, who has recently written a book about World War II, one aspect about World War II, which is little known. But the general topic today is what World War II did to the culture of Hawaii. I was almost 7 at the time of Pearl Harbor, and it really changed my world for me. The exposure to the American culture was really different for me. And Tom, you have your own broader picture of what the culture change was in Hawaii.
Well, the title of your series, as I listened to your intro, and I thought, Making Democracy Work, World War II, from that perspective, I think was crucial to the evolution of a multiracial democratic society in Hawaii. And that's probably at the core of the aspect that I'm concerned about in terms of, researching and writing. Hawaii had been annexed for 40 years at that point, 43 years, literally. And it was it was a very colonial situation.
Yes.
In a lot of ways. And the idea of the different ethnic groups being brought in and sort of manipulated, and a hierarchy of ethnic groups depending on how long you'd been here and what little niches had been carved out and so on. There's a lot of validity to that picture of the territory of Hawaii. And World War II took a hold of some trends, and I think they were positive trends in terms of people coming together. But then they really accelerated those trends, and my thesis is that World War II, as a crisis for the community, revealed a lot of strengths in the community. And they also revealed more in the way of ties across racial boundaries, interethnic ties than...
Is that the trends that you're talking about?
Mm-hmm. It is. I think there was a long-term trend toward improving interracial relationships that preceded the war. And those then became severely tested in the war. In terms of the 40% Japanese ancestry community, I think that it turned out, while there was some anti-Japanese prejudice, the Japanese had a lot of friends.
Yes.
And having a lot of friends in crisis is crucial.
Mm-hmm. I understand that there was a move to put all of the Japanese, which would have been 40% of the population of Hawaii, into concentration camps. But that the book that you've just completed is about the effort to stop this.
Basically, yeah, I seized on a group of people who worked together before the war, idealistic people. By name, Charles Hemingway, who was sort of the father figure of the University of Hawaii, two of his favorite protege, Ching, firstly, and then Shaghayegh Yoshida, so, Chinese, Ching, Shaghayegh Yoshida, Japanese, and then other figures were involved in this interracial effort. One of the most interesting and best-known people was Miles Carey, who's principal of McKinley High School. And they came together a year and a half before the war, and in essence anticipated what would happen and the tremendous pressures that would be brought to bear on Hawaii, never dreaming that, Pearl Harbor would be attacked. It was like a theoretical possibility.
Before we...
but there would be a Pacific War.
Before we get off on that subject, which I know will take a lot of time, let's talk about the effect that having McKinley High School had. I'm sure that you went into that, right?
Yeah, McKinley High School is a really important digression in this conversation. There's this kind of aura around McKinley that it was somehow important, and I think I got back in touch with a great deal more specifics as to why it was so important. It was sort of a public school champion of real community democracy.
And then didn't the fact that McKinley High School existed and people had been educated at McKinley High School play an important part in how Hawaii reacted during the war? Well,
it did, in the sense that McKinley High School was a place where a number of these people came together, and it was also the main public school to produce students for the University of Hawaii. And the University of Hawaii was yet another place where people really came together with shared experiences and acquaintances and bonds of friendship. And so between the two, I think they were, very key.
Before McKinley High School existed, where did people who were not white go for high school? Or was there a high school?
There were virtually no... there was McKinley High School was the descendant of Honolulu High School. Honolulu High School was an institution of the kingdom, and Princess Ruth had played a key role in starting it. It used to be at what is now Lini Kona School, next to Thomas Square, right?
Yes.
So the kingdom, had worked at creating a public school system. And at the time of the annexation, there were, if my number's right, something like 11,000 students in public schools. So that's a certain number. But the expectation was that at the most you would go up to the 6th or 7th grade unless somehow you were quite exceptional. So people had to take a little test to get into McKinley High School. And in the case of my key figures, Ching had to get his older brother's permission to go to McKinley High School.
Is that right?
Yeah, because otherwise he would, like the other siblings, go out into the labor force and help support the family. Right. I think that was quite common.
Right. I believe that Ching was a classmate, maybe not exactly the same grade as my mother. And I know my mother was very proud of McKinley High School. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What class was she?
I don't even know. Isn't that terrible? But she did go on to the University of Hawaii.
She did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
For that time, that was remarkable.
She was a remarkable woman.
I would imagine so. That was remarkable for that time for a student. It was particularly remarkable for a woman.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
So
she was probably around like a class of 1924 or something.
Let me think now. I was born in 1935. So
She was
I
more.
think,
She was early. She was like
Yeah.
19 and 19 teens. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think so. But anyway, yeah, that's not my family.
She was pre. She was pre Miles Carey.
Yeah.
She was pre Ching. Yeah.
Well, I think that she would mention she had quite a few classmates who were millionaires.
It produced a lot of millionaires.
Yes. Yeah.
Ching grew up on the same little street above Chinatown as the famous Chen Ho, for example.
Right.
And they were
right.
both in the same class.
I see. Yes. Okay.
Hung Wai did good, and Chen Ho did well and good too, I
Right.
think.
Right. Yes. So that back to the subject of World War II, though. One of my uncles had a store and made a very good living during World War II. It opened up opportunities for him.
Right.
Were you able to see other opportunities that World War II opened up?
Well, the biggest opportunity, as it turned out, was the opportunity to serve in the armed forces. And it was an opportunity of sacrifice, but it was the key to the development of the Japanese, this very large Japanese community, and the integration of the Japanese community into the larger community system. And that was true to a less extent to the other ethnic groups as well. But it was most remarkable as things played out for the Japanese, because they were on the spot, in the phrase of the day. They were under tremendous suspicion, and it was that's the standard narrative. The standard narrative is profoundly true.
Were the Japanese in Hawaii allowed to enlist in the Army?
It's a very complicated question. Let's see, simple part. There's a key aspect of the history which is not well known, and that is the United States instituted a draft prior to World War II. It was the country's first ever peacetime draft, and it resulted from the Selective Service Act of 1940. And a key feature of that draft was that people could not be precluded from serving because of their ethnicity, because of their race. There was no provision that they couldn't be segregated once they got into the door.
Yeah.
But there was no way to keep non-white people out. And that resulted from lobbying by the NAACP. So there's kind of a parallel. There's kind of a African American parallel in this story in terms of right to serve. And with the institution of the draft, Nisei participation, Japanese American participation in the Army went from virtually 0 to over 2,000 soldiers before the war who were, combat trained. And
these were people who were drafted before the war.
there are people who were drafted and trained before the war.
Yes.
And they became part of a kind of holding action that went on while the whole huge issue of the status of Japanese Americans was being fought out and negotiated and worked out, etc. And
when you say holding action, what do you mean?
Meaning that they continued to serve, and they were standing guard on the perimeter of the Hawaiian Islands. Sort of anonymously, anticipating a Japanese invasion. From December 7th to the May of the following year, May of 1942, so right before the Battle of Midway, and they were quietly, there was a big pivot that went on inside the War Department that said, okay, go ahead and send these troops to Wisconsin for advanced training. And that's the story of the beginning of the 100th Battalion. But what were previously federalized National Guard units became the 100th Battalion. And that the 100th Battalion, which is words you're familiar with,
Yes.
the 100th Battalion was the vanguard of Japanese-American participation in the war.
So that the soldiers of Japanese ancestry who were guarding Hawaii were sent to Wisconsin to form the 100th Battalion.
That's right.
And at that time, was that when they were allowing the Japanese in the camps to enlist?
No. All of these things are disjointed. And there's actually like long time lapses, but if from a community proposition, the key thing that happened from December 7th forward was that there were these groups of community people who were advocating for Japanese American right to serve. And they got to the local general, General Emmons, and convinced him that this was a good idea. And Emmons turned around a key person inside the War Department. An entire year nearly went by before the call for the 442nd.
I see.
Before, in other words, before
Yes.
it really opened up. And during that time, Japanese Americans were not taken into the military. And that's where you hear, like, Dan Inouye's constant reference to, I was categorized an enemy alien by my draft board, which he was, But the tremendous paradox was they had these, now this unit of about 1,300 people in training on the mainland, all the while all of the young Japanese Americans in Hawaii were being treated as enemy aliens, and I talk about changed America, but the exemplary record of the 100th Battalion in training was crucial to the change of heart which occurred in opening up for the 442nd, which was 442nd was a hugely much bigger unit, right?
Now, after December 7th, there were many people who had not been drafted who enlisted. Were the Japanese in Hawaii allowed to enlist between the time that December 7th and the forming of 442nd?
Not really.
I see.
The record is a little confused on that, but I don't think by actual stated policy they were precluded from enlisting until into the spring. But in reality, the draft boards closed the door, and there was a tremendous amount of manipulation of the draft system in Hawaii.
Could you speak a little about the role of General Emmons?
General Emmons was one of the handful of original members of the Army Air Corps. He was a contemporary of people like Billy Mitchell and Hap Arnold, who are famous names in that regard. And
was he here in Hawaii?
He had been in Hawaii in the mid-30s, in charge of the Army Air Corps in Hawaii, and then had gone to Washington, D.C. and been in charge of protecting the airspace over Washington, D.C., among other things, and had gone to London and advised the British on the Blitz. So he was very much on top of, in essence, aerial combat and long-range bombing. And he was assigned to be the replacement commander in Hawaii. And he was very highly qualified for his job.
At what point did he come to Hawaii?
10 days after the Pearl Harbor attack. The commander, Walter Short, famously was stripped of his command, and he was replaced by Emmons. And Emmons walked in the door, talked with the circles of people that I keep referring to, talked with his executive officer. It was a man named Thomas Green, who played a very key role. Talked with Robert Shivers at the FBI, and 4 days after his arrival, made a broadcast that was written by Shaghayegh Yoshida.
That's wonderful.
Which is marvelous,
Yes.
I think. Yeah, but Hawaii loved that. Hawaii's loved to tell that story.
Let's have a picture of Shaghayegh Yoshida.
Okay, yeah. It was written by Yoshida.
Yes, there he is.
And it said, support the war effort, and we will support you.
And this was being read by a man from Washington, D.C., sent to govern Hawaii, correct?
That's right, yeah.
I love that.
And so it was, 4 days into his Hawaii experience, he was convinced that this idea of loyalty is a two-way street, which was very, very fundamental to this whole development.
Yes.
Loyalty
We
is
have
a
only
two-way
5
street.
minutes left, and so go from the beginning of this move to take all the people of Japanese ancestry. I know that that's what you've really been concentrating on. So talk about from wherever you want to start on that.
Well, what happened, I think, basically was capitalizing on all these pre-war relationships and pulling as many people together as you could, and then furiously lobbying for prevention of a mass internment and opening the door to Japanese-American participation in the war effort. It wasn't only Japanese-American participation. There were whole programs and networks of encouraging Japanese alien participation, capitalizing on the sense that you might not have been allowed to become naturalized citizens of this country, but nonetheless Hawaii as a community has been your home, and you have done fairly well here. And we have nurtured your children, educated your children beyond whatever you could have expected in Japan, and support the war effort. Give blood, cut.
And there was no question that the people who were not citizens were supporting the United States, right?
Well, everybody kept nervously, investigating them, but the reality was that they were supporting the war effort. Or there was never an instance of espionage, sabotage, or subversive activity as in the categories of internal security investigations. And so the community building aspect of all of this carried the day. So, and it certainly wasn't perfect. There were arrests, but it was so vastly superior to what happened in the terrible injustices of the U.S. mainland. And in terms of community building, community future, it was, I think, exemplary. Shaghayegh Yoshida's mantra that he kept repeating and other people began repeating was, how we get along during the war will determine how we get along when the war is over.
Yes.
And I think that kind of in a sentence, said aloud.
Mm-hmm. And so Ching's role, Shaghayegh Yoshida seems to have been the writer, the idea man,
Mm-hmm.
and Ching's role?
Well, I knew Hung-Wai, and he loved to say Shaghayegh was the brains and I was the mouth. Hung-Wai was a brilliant man himself. Mm-hmm. He had a degree in engineering from the University of Hawaii and a degree in social work from the University of Chicago and a degree in theology from Yale. And his social IQ was probably about 190.
You're talking about social IQ.
Yeah.
Yes.
But he was an outside man.
Yes, yes.
Shaghayegh was really the contemplative person, mm-hmm. and he was a brain in many ways. I think he's an absolutely brilliant person. Mm-hmm. And he was known within a relatively small circle of veterans, mm-hmm. but otherwise not really widely known in the community.
Yeah, we have only about a minute left, and I know there are other people that you want to talk about. Mm-hmm. For instance, that FBI man.
Well, the FBI man, was Robert Shivers. He was very important because he came out, and he was yet another one of these people who sort of got very quickly turned around. Mm-hmm. John A. Burns.
At what point did he come to Hawaii?
He came in August of 1939.
Oh, so he was already
there.
here.
He was
yes.
there in this big lead-up.
Yes, yes.
John A. Burns played a very crucial role.
Yes.
Burns was politically credited eventually, very belatedly, for playing an important role, and indeed he did. I haven't talked about him sufficiently here, mm-hmm. But he was, hand in glove in this network. And just as briefest thing, then Jack Burns was the connecting link between these movements and statehood.
And there was a woman involved, correct?
The woman was a Japanese-American student boarder who lived with the Shivers family. And they had never known an Asian at that point. And Robert Shivers would come home after work and sit on the living room floor and talk with her about what her experience was growing up in Hawaii, mm-hmm. what it meant to be a Japanese American.
Thank you very much for listening.